Anti-Semitism isn't just rising in America, it's exploding. And while our institutions hesitate, the attacks are getting louder, deadlier, and more brazen. Just this spring, during Passover, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's home was targeted in an arson attack while he and his family were asleep inside. Soon thereafter, a young Jewish couple was murdered in cold blood in Washington, D.C. Their only crime? Being Jewish. And in Boulder, Colorado, an Egyptian national terrorist launched a brutal assault using Molotov cocktails and a flamethrower on a group of Jewish people who were peacefully assembled to support the Israeli hostages. The attack injured an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor, plus 11 other individuals. The question is no longer whether anti-Semitism exists. The question is, why is America tolerating it?
I was shocked. I really thought that kind of thing had been ended in the ruins of Berlin in 1945. And here we are again.
On today's episode of Some Future Day, I sit down with Robert Spencer, scholar, historian, and author of the new book, Antisemitism, History and Myth. Together, we trace the ancient roots of Jew hatred, explore how Islamic extremism and Western academia are feeding the flames, and confront the role social media and influencers are playing in amplifying the world's oldest hatred.
It's a collectivist impulse that is common throughout human history, recurs in different forms, and that the Jews are always standing against.
This conversation is raw, necessary, and deeply unsettling. But it's one we can't avoid. If we stay silent now, the future of Jews in America could mirror the darkest chapters of our past. All right, Robert Spencer, welcome to Some Future Day. It's a pleasure to meet you. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to meet you as well.
Thank you. The issue of anti-Semitism is top of mind. I guess it's a good moment to talk about your new book real quickly. I know you're in this promotional cycle right now, but it's really important. Do you want to take a second and talk about it?
Sure, thanks. Antisemitism, History and Myth is designed to show where antisemitism comes from, why it persists, and what can be done about it, as well as why some of the main charges that are made against the Jews in the aggregate are wrong. And it's designed really to be a response to the fashionable new anti-Semitism that has sprung up after October 7th. I was shocked myself. Actually, I wrote the book because there were a couple of people whom I admired and respected and had worked with in the past who started after October 7th to spout these things like, oh, the Jews control the media, the Jews control the international organizations. They really kind of had this attack coming, things like that. I was shocked. I really thought that kind of thing had been ended with the ruins of Berlin in 1945. And here we are again. I hope that this book will act as a kind of an antidote, at least to some degree.
Well, we're going to touch on a couple of those topics that you hit on in a little bit, but let's go back to the beginning of your book, to the title of your book. I mean, it's widely considered, anti-Semitism is widely considered the oldest hatred. It's the deepest level of hatred recorded throughout like human history. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what elements of that old hatred have you seen historically pulled all the way up to today into 2025?
Yeah, the common thread between all the different sources of anti-Semitism that I go through in the book that I think are indeed the main sources of anti-Semitism, and that is Christianity, Islam, National Socialism, and International Socialism. Christianity being alone among those in actually renouncing anti-Semitism, but of course there's still Christian anti-Semites among us. The thing about all four of those is that they are a larger group that is calling upon everyone in the world to join it. It's a universal call. And the Jews are famous throughout history, renowned and notorious throughout history, for not wanting to join the larger group, whatever it may be, but wanting to hold on to their own identity, their own customs, traditions, and beliefs. And so you have these massive groups that are presenting themselves actually as providing really the solution to the problems of human life. And there's this one group that won't join in. And so it becomes the focus of hatred. I think ultimately, in other words, it's a collectivist impulse that is common throughout human history, recurs in different forms, and that the Jews are always standing against. And this is actually one reason why all those who are interested in human freedom and the dignity of the individual and individual rights in these days should be standing with the Jews in Israel.
Well, that's certainly a topic that's popular on this show, Robert, the idea of individual liberty versus collectivism. When you mentioned those four pillars or those four themes where your book focuses on the history of anti-Semitism and pulling all the way into today, it reminds me actually of a comment that my liberal Jewish friend in Israel said recently, which I was shocked about regarding Islam. He's like, Mark, you don't understand as a New Yorker. These individuals are from their book, from the Quran, they are looking to kill us. They want to put an end to us. And I was really surprised, Robert. This is a friend of mine who doesn't see the world that I do politically, but in this instance, he went way, way beyond me. And I'm curious, from your perspective, is that something that you've recognized too, as it relates to Islam and the Quran?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, without any doubt. I'm surprised, as you were, to hear this coming from somebody who's on the left, because they're generally in total denial about it. But the Quran identifies the Jews as the worst enemies of the Muslims. Says the people who are strongest in enmity toward the believers will be the Jews. That's chapter 5, verse 82 of the Quran. Then there's a famous hadith, a tradition of Muhammad, in which he says that the last hour will not come until Muslims kill Jews. And the Jews will hide behind trees, and the trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." Now, this is a statement that is actually saying that Muslims can bring about the last days, the consummation of all things, the final end of the human race, and the dawning of the new age by killing Jews. They can make it happen closer, because he said the last hour will not come until Muslims kill Jews. And this is something that Muslims believe. It's considered to be an authentic statement of Muhammad. I'm not saying every Muslim in the world believes it, but it is quoted by Hamas, and it is widely taken for granted as axiomatically true in the Islamic world.
So it's interesting, really. It was, if you saw my friend, he's super liberal, but he distinguishes being liberal from progressive. So he's kind of like a little bit more centered, maybe like JFK-ish back in the day,
Yeah. JFK
right?
would
But
be considered a MAGA extremist nowadays.
for sure, for sure. But he feels like what you just described is really like deeply rooted within that
Oh,
community.
yeah.
And it doesn't matter like what politicians say, what, countries are doing as it relates to aligning with new accords or treaties. He feels that the thing humans are missing today is that issue that you just highlighted is so deeply rooted that the approach we're taking, we're not speaking, like the Christians and the Jews aren't speaking the same language as individuals from the Islam faith as it relates to just going and killing Jews.
That's right. I mean, look, you look at Hamas, some of the statements coming out of it are absolutely staggering. Some years ago, Pamela Geller and I put billboards up and ads on buses in New York and so on that quoted Hamas saying that our killing Jews is a form of worship, is worship of Allah. And people wrote and said that we had fabricated this quote or were parodying Hamas. It's a real quote. You can find it in the Middle East Media Research Institute archives. And they actually think of this as a kind of a holy thing that brings them closer to Allah. And another thing about this, my friend Bosch Fawston is an ex-Muslim who grew up in New York in a secularized Muslim household. They identified as Muslim, but they didn't go to mosque but a couple times a year. People who just didn't take it all that seriously. They had a Quran in the house, but nobody ever read it. But he said there was one constant among his family and everybody he knew. They all had contempt for women and hated Jews. These were just universals in the Islamic community, even among people who were not especially religious.
So there's this weird, like since October 7th, when you talk about Hamas, there's like this weird rising support in Western democracies for Hamas. But then you highlight not just like Jew hatred, but also the positioning. I was going to say like the way that Islam puts the women as subservient within the religion. Why don't we hear about these types of topics? Like, why is it that a Western democracy like the United States, people in our government will support Hamas clearly, but they don't talk at all about how women are treated within Islam?
Well, it's something that, in the first place, has been stigmatized. You can't talk about it because if you talk about it, you're a racist, bigoted Islamophobe. I mean, you're going to get heat for talking to me because for 20 some years now, I have been calling attention to things like the institutionalized mistreatment of women in the Islamic world and the response of the Muslim groups in the United States, like the Council on American Islamic Relations, which has multiple ties to Hamas, incidentally, and is also deeply embedded with the American left. They say, oh, it's Islamophobic to talk about that. It's a kind of racism, even though Islam is not a race. And so people are afraid now. They've internalized that over all these years of having it hammered into them. They're afraid. And they think if I say that the hijab is not a choice, that many women are beaten or killed for not wearing it, that it is it's a visible sign of oppression, then I'm a racist, bigoted Islamophobe. And they've been thoroughly intimidated away from talking about these.
Robert, for the sake of this conversation for the show, when you highlight that situation where women are beaten if they don't wear a hijab, can you point the audience towards a moment in time or something that they could research so that they see you're not just being a racist bigot?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of
Please.
fact, I've got a lengthy list of women who were brutalized and or killed for not wearing hijab at my website, jihadwatch.org. One of the people you can find that list by searching for is a girl named Aqsa Parvez. That's Aqsa Parvez. Aqsa Parvez, who lived in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada. And in 2007 or 9, I forget which year, but in any case, she was actually strangled to death by her father and brother with the hijab that she refused to wear. And that is not an isolated incident by any means. It is frequent in Europe and in North America for women to face actual violence for not wanting to wear the hijab.
Interesting. So if you go back into history, like focusing on your new book again and looking back at anti-Semitism throughout history, were there key turning points, Robert, that you can highlight which led us to where we are today, like key moments in time that brought us to this new widespread modern anti-Semitism?
Yeah, there's so many. One thing that immediately leaps to mind, though, is the medieval trial of the Talmud that was led by Christian authorities. The Talmud was actually put on trial. There was a convert from Judaism to Christianity who alerted the Pope in, I believe, the 13th century to the existence of the Talmud, of which the Pope had been unaware, and told him that it's full of all this anti-Christian material, it's full of all this hateful and subversive material, and it's the book that guides the Jews in their behavior that is frankly subversive, and it needs to be destroyed. And the Talmud was found guilty, and massive numbers of copies of it were burned at a time when books were still all copied by hand. It was an extraordinary act of destruction for the Jewish community and Jewish tradition. Now, nowadays, of course, you find this persisting in these proof texts. If you go on X or Twitter, you will find the anti-Semites that have sprung up now like mushrooms after a rain. They frequently like to post these lists of texts from the Talmud that supposedly show that the Jews are embracing evil, that they hate the non-Jews, that they want to kill the non-Jews or destroy their societies, and so on. And so I show in the book, actually, that this is a massive misrepresentation of the Talmud, that the Talmud is, of course, a huge text that deals with non-Jews only very glancingly. It's not like it's some sort of subversive manual of hatred against non-Jews. It deals with a massive variety of subjects. It's not a text like the Quran where every word of it is something that Muslims have to obey and implement, whether they do or not. And but it's a record of conversations over various subjects, disagreements, separate differing opinions over various issues. And so the proof texts that the haters of the Talmud and the haters of the Jews fasten upon are generally fabricated outright or willfully misrepresented. And yet this is something that I've seen spring up again. And it's supposed to support the claim that the Jews are some kind of a corrosive in a society, that they come in and they work on trying to tear it down. And this is in accord with their secret manual that tells them to do all this. And people
Right.
take this kind of thing seriously to this day.
So it's all over social media. Would you consider the advent of social media one of these key turning points that has had an impact on flaring up anti-Semitism?
Oh, absolutely. Because people get stampeded. There are social contagions that can spread so much easier. There've always been social contagions, crazy things that people start to think that you get massive numbers of people ending up thinking, like the Salem witch trials and so on, where you had people saying, I saw so and so talking to the witches, and people believe it, and other people say, yeah, I saw the same thing. Nowadays, it's very easy to spread that kind of thing. On the other hand, social media has also been responsible for a great deal of good. It's a mixed bag like anything else. I don't want to condemn it wholesale. You take, for example, the fact that in the Islamic world, there are challenges to the jihadist assumptions and also to Islamic anti-Semitism that are able to reach into areas that they were never able to penetrate before. Because if you ventured, of course, into Arabia previously and started preaching something that might be construed as critical of the Quran or Muhammad, you'd be killed immediately. But now you put it online, people can see it in Riyadh and even in Mecca.
Yeah, I think, you talk about social contagion. I think that groupthink is real. And unfortunately, it's starting with the younger generation. In fact, even Generation Alpha now is finding these anti-Semitic videos on platforms like Reels and TikTok. It's really easy for them to scroll through it. And, they're getting their education. They're being brainwashed to a certain extent that way. Robert, just recently, like a week or two ago, the United States federal government passed a new act called the Take It Down Act, which holds these social media platforms like Snap, Meta, Google, TikTok responsible if there's a victim of non-consensual intimate imagery, deep fake porn, and if it's reported and the social media platform doesn't remove that deep fake porn within 48 hours, they're liable. So it's a shift away from 230. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, legally, do you think that it's time for these social media platforms to be held accountable for the rise of anti-Semitism or hate speech in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult situation because I'm a free speech absolutist. I don't think there should be any kind of restrictions on speech that are other than outright calls for violence or things like that, or criminal activity. If I'm telling you, go and loot a store or something, then yeah, take that down. If, on the other hand, I'm saying, well, there was no Holocaust, I would rather there be a response to that on a rational basis. Now, I may be being naive in this because I understand people aren't really moved by rational arguments. My whole life has been trying to present rational arguments on these controverted issues, but really,
Yeah.
I'm aware, actually even more so after the last 30 years, that having a convincing argument doesn't really do it. And then it's a very difficult situation. I would like to see the platforms open up a bit more, especially, I mean, X is pretty good now since Elon bought it, but the others are still basically only open to one point of view. And if that needs to be loosened, I think the antidote ultimately to bad speech is more speech, not less. And if there could be complete freedom of thought and freedom of discussion on these platforms, then I am still naively confident that the truth would win out in the end.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Robert. Professor Jonathan Turley, who I imagine you're familiar with
Oh yeah.
his work, he joined us on some future day as a guest here, and he actually shared data in Germany where he created a correlation between free speech absolutism and a diminishing amount of anti-Semitism in that marketplace. He's actually for free speech absolutism as you are. But he pointed out with data, he backed it up that in Germany, the amount of anti-Semitic incidents has actually diminished, and he thinks that's because freedom of speech is so wide there.
Mhm. Well, I hope so. That's encouraging to hear. It is very odd at the same time that I see on Twitter these people, nobody ever heard of them. I mean, I've been out there myself for 20 some years. And of course, I had massive restrictions on my account while Twitter was under the old management. And I think some of
Sure.
those still linger. But I have 277,000 followers. I only mention that to say, by comparison, these people that sprung up out of nowhere, like Jackson Hinkle and Lucas Gage, and some of these people that nobody heard of, but up until October 7th, really, I think, maybe a little bit before that. And they have 500,000 followers, 2 million followers, massive numbers of people. I think that is being manipulated somehow. And that is also something that needs to be investigated and stopped. I'm in favor of a level playing field, not one that's tilted in favor of any one group.
Yeah, me too, Robert. I completely understand. But you start to talk about these like new influencers in the digital space, people that are creating content. And as a result, they don't have the traditional news media guardrails in place. They don't really have, if you think about it, journalistic integrity. Not that mainstream media does today anyway, but they're certainly not trained that way. And we're starting to see a lot of anti-Semitic statements pop up with individuals that have been respected personalities within, let's say, content creation and social media. People, for example, like Candace Owen or even Tucker Carlson. I think they're very irresponsible as of late with regards to guests that come on the show, information that's factually incorrect historically, and really just pounding on that anti Semitic drum over and over. And I think there's a certain level of irresponsibility that comes not just with reporting the wrong facts, just with reporting factually inaccurate information, but they also have this tribe that follows them no matter what they say. And they know that. People like Tucker Carlson has a massive amount, millions and millions of people that are part of the Tucker tribe today. And they're not going to go and do the research. They're not going to go and verify if what Tucker and or his guests are saying is factually accurate. So what do you think about that moment in time where we have all of a sudden these personalities rising up and they sure we want them to have freedom of speech, but how do they become operators with integrity, with morals and ethics, so that they're not hurting anybody.
Well, this is the constant problem. Tucker has had this reputation for being a straight shooter, somebody who was honest, and somebody who had integrity. If he really is that, then he should have on a historian who will counter what Darryl Cooper was saying about the about the whole situation of World War II, about the Holocaust, about Hitler, and so on, about Churchill. Let him have somebody on with equal time and let people evaluate the competing claims for themselves. Otherwise, you have the problem of a massive platform that is only on one side, and that is a big problem. But once again, I can't come down in favor of restrictions on their activities. I think the establishment media, the mainstream media, is a good example of that because they had a some sort of a doctrine in place. I remember from years ago that if they were espousing or giving room to one faction of the on the political spectrum to espouse a certain opinion, they had to give equal time to the other. And
I'm old enough to remember that too.
yeah, and
But
that was really more form than substance because they would what they would present as being the straight news was highly slanted. I mean, I remember my dad would come home from work and put on Walter Cronkite and then sit there and yell at him for the
yeah,
whole time. And
yeah,
he
yeah.
thought that he was tremendously unfair in his presentation of the what was supposed to be the way it is, as Walter himself would say. And so, you know, maybe there could be some way in which the countering views were made available to the same population. I don't know if that's even possible.
Yeah, I think the problem is, Robert, that it's capitalism, right? People
Yeah.
are sensationalists. They're like anti-Semitic sensationalists for, dollars effectively. That's really what they're doing. They're fishing for clicks, and as a result, they're getting paid. Their audiences matter. You mentioned yourself, like your audience is at about 250,000. These people go into the, tens, hundreds of millions. So it's a whole different situation. And I think a lot of it is, hey, let's not worry about the Jewish people. Let's just fuel let's fuel
Mhm.
capitalism now by being anti-Semitic. I
Yeah.
think that's what we're looking at.
And so, what's behind it? We need to look into this. And people have alleged, well, Tucker has a big funder who's from Qatar, and Qatar is on the side of Hamas. The Hamas leaders were there on October 7th, watching the thing on some closed circuit setup and celebrating. And so that needs to be widely exposed. And maybe that would bring some sanity to this. Once again, if the playing field is uneven and Tucker is able, by means of Qatari millions or some other means, to have a larger platform than is warranted, then that needs to be leveled.
Are those Tucker accusations founded? Like, has anybody? I've heard them too. I'm curious. Like, though, has anybody shown exactly where that Qatari money comes from? Has
I
it been
thought there was a
proven?
guy, but I'm not entirely sure. I haven't looked into it myself, so I'll just note the allegation is out there, may not be true. He may be acting entirely from conviction. I know that human nature being what it is, anybody can be corrupted, anybody can be bought, anybody can be manipulated. And these people, also just human beings in general need to beware. You shouldn't take what we're saying just at face value either. Look into what I'm saying. My books always are extensively footnoted, just hundreds and hundreds of footnotes so that people can go and check what I'm saying and make sure that what I'm saying is accurate. And they should always do that, even with Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's interesting when you talk about Qatar. There's another issue with regards to the almighty dollar and democracy and capitalism coming into play. As you're aware, President Trump and the Trump administration, key cabinet members just went for a quick tour across the GCC. They were in UAE, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. I think they amassed about $2 trillion worth of financial value back to America, specifically as it relates to artificial intelligence. But I didn't hear much from the administration as it relates to some of the things you just highlighted, as far as, Qatar having Hamas leadership there, Qatar kind of celebrating anti-Semitism in a way, I'm sure you would agree, after October 7th. Did you hear anything on your side? Is my assessment
No,
correct?
you're absolutely right. It's very strange, and it's a matter of tremendous concern. I mean, of course, the president is a businessman. He comes from that world. He's been extraordinarily successful in making deals, and he obviously thinks that he can make a deal with anybody around anything. And he did. During his first term, he brought about the Abraham Accords. John Kerry was saying you cannot possibly bring peace in the Middle East while bypassing the Palestinians. Trump did exactly that and
Yes,
showed that on
amazing.
the basis of mutual self-interest that he could come to accord with these states that had previously been on the other side. And so it's something, it's understandable that he would want to do it. But I saw that when he met with Ashara, the president of Syria, who was an Al-Qaeda guy, he led an
I
Al-Qaeda
know.
group for years. And
Yeah.
he's saying, you really ought to make peace with Israel. I thought, well, is he just being naive, or does he have some leverage that he thinks that he can bring to bear on this? I suppose time will tell. But with Qatar, I didn't even hear him say anything like that. And so
Correct.
that's those two things, his support for Israel and his friendship with Qatar, are ultimately in contradiction with one another. And whether that contradiction will come to a head while he's president or not remains to be seen. But it's there. It's not going to go away.
The conversations with Al Shahara over in Syria just blow my mind. I mean, we had a whole full episode about him and soft power, terrorism, and repackaging. I mean, the guy's walking around in these beautiful Tom Ford suits and giving Macron pats on the back and high fives. But I think in this instance, did I? If I again, I'll defer to you. I think I read that we actually helped Syria helped Al Shahara pay off some of his debt. So I'm wondering, like, where the American government is going. And you remember part of Al Shara's repackaging from Al Qaeda, a true terrorist, into Al Shara. At one point, his name was Julani, right? Al Julani.
Which is
So it's
Golan, by the way.
right,
He's
right.
saying he's Abu Muhammad al-Jilani is the father of Muhammad of the Golan. He's going to take the Golan back for Islam. In other words, take it back from Israel. And so that was his nom de guerre as a jihadi. Now he's reverted to his birth name, and yeah, he's got a suit on, so he must be a moderate.
Yeah, he's got to be. Look, I don't want to just knock Trump because I'm obviously a supporter, and there are a lot of moving parts. And he
Yeah,
is doing, I think he is the number one best president in history of America for the Jewish people. So something that we could point to, getting back to freedom of speech, is what he's been doing at the university level, right? As it relates to Harvard, and I believe HSS just put out a press release in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Education surrounding Columbia. I think Columbia's next. What's your take on that situation? Obviously, the universities are like raging with anti-Semitism right now. It's so out of control. But staying on the Trump thread for a second, do you think Trump is trying to get us back to some level of normalcy, and that's why he's instituting these measures, taking away billions of dollars from Harvard and other universities? Like, what do you think his end game is here?
yeah, I think that he's trying to make the universities into universities again. That for too long now, they have been wastelands of far left indoctrination. That you have people go in and they think, I'm going to become a businessman or a doctor or a lawyer, and they just come out Antifa. And so
Right.
he's trying to balance what the universities are teaching, or compel them to bring back some balance to their presentations. The universities are howling that their freedom of speech is being infringed upon. But actually, when he restricts the pro-Hamas rallies and demonstrations and the encampments and all that nonsense on the university campuses, that we're not talking about the freedom of speech. When you have people, the demonstrators at Columbia, breaking into buildings and occupying the buildings and terrorizing the Jewish students and preventing them from getting to their classes, that we're not talking about some sort of polite debate here. We're talking about thuggery that needs to be curbed and has no place in a university. So, in the first place, he's completely right to try to hold it over the universities that they'll get no federal funding if they allow this sort of thing to continue. And the ultimate goal, I mean, I remember I was at at university back in 1979 to 83. And even then, only one point of view really was allowed to be heard, and it was the far left point of view. It's only gotten much exponentially worse since then. And so he wants to see these institutions of higher learning be that instead of what they've become.
Seems like it's going to be very difficult to break that, though, Robert, because you have, I think you just hinted to it, and maybe this was your point. I mean, you have decades and decades of anti-Semitic ideology that's built into the curricula now at this point. So it's not just the young kids that are on the street protesting. Maybe some of them don't even know why they're protesting or what they're fighting for, right? Like they might be pro-Hamas, but they're just trying to self-actualize or find an identity similar to what we saw with the underground weathermen and all that kind of stuff back in the 70s or whenever that was. But what we have a situation here where the academics, the professors, are also teaching this type of rhetoric.
Yes. And so that has to be addressed by the institutions themselves, and they have to be made to feel the pain in order to address it. And by feeling the pain, I mean that he's going to cut off their federal funding and the donors should stop giving. I know so many people who are giving to their old alma maters because they had a wonderful time there in the 50s or something, and now they're 75 or 80 and they're billionaires, and they think that it's still the same there or still pretty much the same, so that they still drop a billion or I'm sorry, a million or two on Berkeley or Stanford or Columbia. I know several people who have done this. And I have spoken to them or tried to speak to them and say, it's really not like it was when you were there. And these places are not really anything that you ought to support. And that is a message I think we need to take up and try to trumpet far more than it has been, so that the people who are funding these massive endowments also start to make those endowments dry up. And when the universities are really looking for money and really hurting and looking at having to close their doors or end some of their programs, then I think they'll start to open up.
It seems like, Robert, the anti-Semitism hill is so high up for us to climb. I mean, you and I just kind of glazed over the idea of like how tech is supporting and fomenting anti-Semitism with the social media platforms. We easily touched on academia. It's institutional, even at the government level. I mean, think, for example, the United Nations. I think the essence of the UN, it was like born out of World War II and the Holocaust so that that would never happen again. To a certain extent, that's why it was built. And yet the UN seems to be sick with anti-Semitism as well.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, you're right. It's very deeply entrenched and it's very high up. But because it is a lie and because it is so hateful, I'm confident that it can fall as suddenly and as quickly as the Berlin Wall came down. And, people of a certain age remember how surprising that was and how just a few years before that, we were hearing as a matter of settled fact that the Soviet Union was here to stay. We had to find some accommodation with it.
Yeah.
It was otherwise there was just nuclear war and the destruction of the world, and so we had to have these various agreements with it and various concessions. Everybody took that for granted. And then suddenly, Ronald Reagan became president. He said it was an evil empire, and everybody was shocked and angry with him and saying, "You're just going to get them mad, and it's going to cause trouble, and you're going to cause World War III." And he said that it can be destroyed, it can be ended if it just a little push economically, and it will fall. And he turned out to be right. And so once again, maybe I'm being naive, but I think that this huge, massive international superstructure that includes anti-Semitism can be easily destroyed. And one of the reasons why they hate Trump so much is because he is exposing how easily they can be destroyed and how vulnerable they really are. He may not even succeed in pushing them over the cliff, but it can be done. And I do think that it will be done within the next quarter century or so.
Well, Robert, it's kind of interesting I'm just thinking about your words as it relates to communist Russia, the Soviet Union, and comparing that to anti-Semitism. The media, the legacy media plays such a significant role today with regards to working as a driving force for anti-Semitism. So we have it in social media, but legacy media, when I turn it on, for the most part, there are some exceptions for sure, but for the most part, most of the reporting today is anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. It's rare that I'll come across, like, I could name them. Stella Escobedo at OAN does an amazing job in telling the truth as it relates to Jews and Israel. Some of my colleagues over at Fox do a phenomenal job at supporting Israel. But beyond that, they're few and far between. So I wonder if the media is creating, the legacy media is creating such an anti-Israel, anti-Semitic sentiment that for generations it's going to be tough to knock. Whereas like with communism and the former Soviet Union, they had so many flaws, right? They were built to crumble because they couldn't even sustain a healthy economy. But with this hate that we're talking about, it's like a poison of the mind of sorts, and it's driven into all of these different institutions, and media is really a driving engine for it. Legacy media. You're laughing because you see my wheels spinning, and I can't get enough of it out, right?
No, you're absolutely right. I'm actually laughing because I'm in a position in our conversation here of being the guy who's optimistic. And usually I'm the guy who comes in and makes everybody depressed. And so I find this astonishing, really.
Oh
It's a lot
boy.
of fun. But I think here again, I've got to say, maybe I'm being naive, but I don't see the establishment media as that all powerful anymore. Maybe they were a few decades ago, or when my dad was cursing at Walter Cronkite, there was just no alternative. There were the three channels, and that was it. And you got the news from them or the newspapers, and they all had the same line, and that was that. But now there are so many alternatives. And you've got the President of the United States, who, while widely hated, has a considerable following, and he routinely refers to them with total contempt as fake news. And people see that and they see, yeah, they really are lying. You're absolutely right. I read AP and Reuters, and it's like reading Hamas communiques. But also, they are being discredited. It is their stranglehold, I do believe, is lessening. The fact that we're able to have this conversation and that people will watch it, and that I have the website and the books that I've written, and other people are out there with far larger platforms than I am, telling the truth than I have, telling the truth about these things. That was never true before. And so I think their end is at hand.
Robert, I hope so. I mean, it's amazing that you're more optimistic about it than I am. But my fear goes really towards that younger generation, Gen Alpha, because I see it. I'm around it in our household specifically. So you could even look at celebrity marketing and influencer marketing, where an 8-year-old girl in New York City is watching TikTok, and their favorite celebrity is going and speaking in a pro-Hamas way, right? And that hits deep. That goes deep for these kids. Where else are they getting their education? It's their version of Tucker Carlson, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's problematic as well. Why haven't, actually, let me ask you, unless you disagree, why haven't American celebrities stood up on the side of like moral reasoning or moral clarity or just the right thing as since October 7th. It's been really very, very far and few celebrities that have stood up in support of Israel and the Jews.
Well, that's because they're useless. They're celebrities. Look, if you're an actor, what do you know? You know how to act. You know how to pretend to be somebody else. What do you know about politics or morality or anything? Whoever taught you to think? And then people come around and they ask you your opinions on things. And so what opinion are you going to choose? And retail, you're going to repeat what you think is going to be the opinion that makes the most people like you, because what you want is people to like you so they'll watch your movies or buy your records or buy your streams or whatever. And that's all they're interested in, and that's all they know. And so the idea of people taking celebrities seriously in the first place is something that also needs to be challenged and rejected. But here again, I don't share the pessimism about the younger generation either, because I have experienced young people I know who are thoroughly sick of the total hegemony of the leftist indoctrination that they receive at school, that they hear from all the celebrities, that they get from everywhere. And a lot of them are growing very skeptical. And that includes being skeptical of the hatred of Israel. There are also young people who think that they're being brave and rebellious by coming out as neo-Nazi or at very least as against Israel, because they think that the establishment is pro-Israel. Well, obviously, the establishment is deeply anti-Israel. And so young people have the tendency to rebel in the teen years. I think that that is working in the favor of truth and righteousness at this point.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about anti-Israel sentiment and then open the lens on an international level. Help me get through this thought, but I don't know how many Arab nations exist and how many of
56.
them are democracies. But going back to
Well,
your
no, I'm sorry.
earlier,
22 Arab nations exist. None are democracies. 56 Muslim nations. Go ahead. Sorry.
okay, so going back to the 56 number and to your earlier comment where you're saying like within the Quran there is rhetoric that calls for the killing of Jews, yet here are these nations surrounding Israel and none of them are democracies. They'll never allow for a difference of opinion to rise to the top, right? Theoretically, how can Israel survive such a mindset?
Israel can survive by being strong. And that actually is an Islamic theological principle, that you do not wage jihad against an enemy who has more than twice your strength and you have no chance of winning. That you will find that in manuals of Islamic law. And so the idea that Israel can solve this problem and live in peace on the basis of some negotiated settlement, that's a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. The two-state solution, total hogwash. There will never be a state, a Palestinian state that will live in peace with Israel. It will just become a new jihad base to destroy Israel. But if Israel stands strong and is stronger than its neighbors, then it can survive. This is, in other words, a problem that cannot be solved, but it can be managed. Americans don't like problems that cannot be solved, and I'm sorry to have to give you one, but now I'm back in my more familiar mode of being the guy with the bad news. The Israel can survive, and I hope it will. And remember that while the Quran teaches those things, that doesn't mean that every Muslim in the world believes them and is going to act upon them. The Quran does teach those things, and as long as there are believers in the Quran and Muhammad and Islam, there will be people who think they have to fight to destroy Israel. But there are also all kinds of other variables. People have different priorities and interests and so on. People can be made to make agreements on a pragmatic basis, as Trump showed with the Abraham Accords. However long they last, I don't think they're going to last forever, but they have postponed at least the jihad imperative for those countries that are involved at this point. There's also other things like the total fatalism in Islam. Do you know John Roy Carlson? He was an Armenian American journalist during the war, during World War II. He actually went undercover and Nazi groups in the United States, wrote a very interesting book about that. And then after World War II, he went to Egypt and he wrote a book called From Cairo to Damascus, where he spent a lot of time with the Arab jihadis who were trying to destroy the new state of Israel. And he traveled with Egyptian troops to the borders of Israel, and he witnessed the Arab troops, there were no Palestinians yet, the Arab troops firing all their ammunition into the air in the morning and then going and playing dominoes all day. And they would say, Allah will guide the bullets. And so you wonder why Israel was able to, with hardly any weaponry, hardly any army, in 1948, just after it declared independence, Israel was able to defeat 5 Arab nations. It was that kind of thinking. And so do I think that Israel is ultimately going to be destroyed by the jihadis? It's possible. If they let their guard down as they did on October 7th, if they keep doing that, if they grow complacent, if they retain their ignorance about Islam and continue to disregard its importance in motivating the Palestinian Arabs to wage jihad against it. But if they are smart and if they stay strong, they can prevail.
Robert, do you think Bibi Netanyahu's behavior since October 7th has hurt Jews worldwide?
I don't see how. He's been determined to defend Israel. He has done so with great constraints from the Biden administration and some unwarranted constraints and unexpected ones, unfortunately, from the Trump administration as well. And yet he has stood strong, as just as I was saying needed to be done, and he has decimated Hamas, decimated Hezbollah. Iran has currently no significant air defenses after the Israeli airstrikes of October 2024. If the Iranian regime falls, the entire situation in the Middle East will change, and that could happen within the timeline of this administration. And so the people who are ganging up on him, we have to remember that they have been on the side of the jihad against Israel. The Biden administration, which financed Hamas, financed Iran, they were trying to get Netanyahu out, financing the demonstrations against Netanyahu before October 7th. And so I don't think these are people that decent people need to credit.
Robert, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you. Next time.
We close the show with every guest in a similar fashion. Basically, what I do is I create a lead question for our guests, and we lead with the name of the show, Some Future Day, which is a cool James Joyce reference. Are you game?
Yes, but tell me again how it works. I didn't.
So I'm gonna give you a lead. I'm gonna create the beginning of a sentence, and you're gonna finish it.
Okay, got it. Okay.
All right, you got this. So, in some future day, anti-Semitism will come to an end because
people will realize that the dividing line between good and evil does not run between one group and another, but down the middle of every human heart, as Solzhenitsyn said. And thus, the idea of the demonization of one group as uniquely evil is out of focus and inaccurate in terms of the reality of human nature.
Robert, thank you so much for joining me today on Some Future Day. It truly was a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Some Future Day. I know your time is super valuable, so I hope you learned how you can leverage emerging technology to improve your life. And exciting news, my new book, Some Future Day, How AI is Going to Change Everything, is now available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, and other major booksellers across the globe. I am so proud to share that because of your support, the book topped the charts. It became #1 bestseller in cryptocurrency, #1 bestseller in artificial intelligence, and #1 bestseller in robotics. So, if you're curious and ready to learn how AI can enhance your career, your community, and your family, get yourself a copy today.